Black Dahlia. Episode 19. Other Suspects. A list of suspects compiled by Lieutenant Frank Jemison contained these 22 names. 1. Carl Balsiger. 2. C. Welsh. 3. Sergeant Chuck, name unknown. 4. John D. Wade. 5. Joe Scalise. 6. James Nimmo. 7. Maurice Clement. 8. A Chicago police officer. 9. Salvador Torres Vara. 10. Dr. George Hodell. 11. Marvin Margolis. 12. Glenn Wolfe. 13. Michael Anthony Otero. 14. George Bacos. 15. Francis Campbell. 16. Queer woman surgeon. 17. Dr. Paul DeGaston. 18. Dr. A. E. Bricks. 19. Dr. M. M. Schwartz. 20. Dr. Arthur McGinnis Fought. 21. Dr. Patrick S. O'Reilly. 22. Mark Hansen. We have already looked at George Hodell and Mark Hansen in detail. Other names such as Maurice Clement, Patrick S. O'Reilly, Marvin Margolis, and Sergeant Chuck have been mentioned in earlier episodes. In many cases little if anything is known about them. And I think in some cases these suspects should be considered as being witnesses rather than suspects. Please take this information with a grain of salt. There is little known about some of these suspects, and some information has been gathered from websites that do not list their sources. So please do your own research and come to your own conclusions. Let's start at the beginning. 1. Carl Balsiger. Carl Balsiger was known to have dated Beth. He took her on a trip to Camarillo, California shortly before she departed for San Diego. They stayed in a motel on Yucca Street on December 7th, and he claimed to have put her on the bus to San Diego on December 8th. It has been reported that his name was either in the address book Beth stole from Mark Hansen or found written on a sheet of paper that had been among the items sent to the police. Although he was stationed at Camp Cook at the same time Beth worked there, he said he did not know her at that time. Police questioned Balsiger if he was the mysterious Sergeant Chuck who had supposedly beaten Beth while she stayed with him during her time at Camp Cook. He denied the allegation and his service record showed no evidence of court-martial. There are claims that he beat at least women he was dating. Balsiger attended the University of Kansas as did murder victim Layla Adele Welsh, sometimes known as Dorothy, who was murdered in 1941. Welsh was an heiress to a real estate fortune after her grandfather's death. Welsh's mother found her corpse on the morning of March 9, 1941 at the family home. She had been murdered in the night with her family asleep in the house. Her throat had been slit. She had been bludgeoned with a hammer, and, like the Black Dahlia, a piece of flesh had been cut from her thigh. Her brother George was charged with the murder, but he was acquitted. The only reason this even comes up as part of the Black Dahlia investigation is because Balsiger was in Kansas at the time of Welsh's murder, and the flesh cut from her thigh is similar to the wound on Beth's thigh. Balsiger passed a lie detector test. And it would be unlikely that he wouldn't have removed his name from Beth's address book or sent a paper with his name on it with Beth's belongings. So in the end, even though Lieutenant Jemison said Balsiger had a propensity for violence, he seems like a weak suspect to have murdered Beth. 2. C. Welsh. C. Welsh or Claude Welsh may have been Layla Adele Welsh's brother George, who might have been in Los Angeles at the time of Beth's murder, and his name probably came up in connection to the Balsiger investigation. Another named Claude turned up as the brother of Dr. Fought. Claude helped Fought out in his office as a bookkeeper. See more in the Fought, Schwartz section numbers 19 and 20. 3. Sergeant Chuck, name unknown. Sergeant Chuck is the mysterious boyfriend from Camp Cook who let Beth stay with him during her time working at the PX there. Beth filed a complaint, but it was denied. However, it was said he faced a court-martial and was sent overseas. On Larry Harnish's website, he has a quote about Sergeant Chuck by Lieutenant Jemison. See link below for full details. Jemison said,
Sergeant Chuck, last name unknown, was seen with victim on numerous occasions at Camp Cook in the spring of 1943. She testified that he had assaulted her at the court-martial proceedings there, and he was ordered overseas as a result of it. She then attempted to obtain his personal property which it was necessary for him to leave behind. It is agreed by investigators that this could be a revenge murder committed by such a person as Sergeant Chuck. Thus far, numerous associates of victim at Camp Cook have been interviewed, and a search has been made for the records of this court-martial proceedings which would reveal the full name, background and information on this suspect. Thus far they have not been found. The investigation of this suspect is pending. See Los Angeles Police Department reports.
Harnish also wonders if Chuck even existed, providing the quote from Inez Keeling in the January 17, 1947, Los Angeles Examiner about Beth's time at Camp Cook and her dating habits there.
She never visited over the counter with any of the boys and always refused to date them. She was one of the few girls in my employ who didn't smoke or occasionally take a drink. She lived in camp and never went out nights.
Whatever the truth of it, there isn't enough to go on with Sergeant Chuck. 4. John D. Wade. He may have been connected to Beth through the Crown Grill, an establishment where people claimed Beth frequented and had been seen at. Some say she was seen here after she left the Biltmore on January 9. 5. Joe Scalise. Another connection to the Crown Grill. He and two other employees, one probably being John D. Wade, claimed to have seen Beth there on January 9, after she left the Biltmore. 6. James Nimmo. Worked with John Egger, who was previously mentioned in another episode at CBS Studios, and witnessed seeing Beth there possibly as many as 20 times to see the recording of the Jack Carson radio show. Egger claimed the date was either January 2nd or 8th, but Beth was at the French home in San Diego on the 2nd and leaving with Red Manley on the 8th. 7. Maurice Clement. Some theories, especially the mafia theory promoted by Donald Wolfe in his book The Black Dahlia Files, claim Maurice Clement was thug working for Bugsy Siegel and Mickey Cohen, who also worked as a procurer of girls for the Brenda Allen prostitution ring. He was also claimed by Wolfe to be part of the team that murdered Beth. See the Mob Did It episode for more information. It is speculated that he was the mysterious benefactor who sometimes drove Beth around and paid her bills, and had been the driver of the 1936 or 37 Ford sedan frequently associated with Beth's movements. A photo that Wolfe published in his book reported to be of Clement is claimed by researcher Larry Harnish to actually be Salvador Torres Vara, who also appears on the suspect list. What is known for certain is that he worked at Columbia Studios and his name was in Beth's address book. 8. A Chicago police officer. This comes from the reported sighting by CBS studio ushers John Egger and John Nimmo at the Jack Carson radio show, who claim Beth usually came to the shows alone, but on one occasion usually reported at January 2nd or 8th, she was accompanied by someone flashing a Chicago Police Department badge. Researcher Steve Hodell claims that the Chicago police officer is his father, George Hodell, with a fake badge. This suspect theory is the result of some researchers trying to tie the Chicago murder of 6-year-old Suzanne Degnan to the Black Dahlia murder. Some, including Steve Hodell, claim that his father also killed Degnan and point out the close proximity of Degnan Boulevard to the Beth Short body dump site. Believers of this theory also point out that Beth supposedly had a fascination with the Degnan murder, and that she actually traveled to Chicago to investigate the case on her own, even sleeping with a reporter, Slig Diamond, and someone named Jack Chernow, who was in the upholstery business, to get information. See episode 13 for more information about this, or in Childhood Shadows by Mary Pacios pages 364 through 366. This was a famous case. It would have been one thing to have an interest, but this is out of character for Beth. She never previously showed any interest in unsolved murder cases, and sleeping with two men in a short period of time is way out of character for her. 9. Salvador Torres Vara. May have worked as a dishwasher at Brittingham's. Also listed as a medical student on at least one website. Another website, hellasfrap.blogspot.com, states that Vara stated that graduated in surgery at the University of Mexico City. 10. Dr. George Hodell. Already covered. 11. Marvin Margolis. Marvin Margolis has appeared before as Beth's so-called cousin who dropped her off at Mark Hanson's, using that as a story so as not to arouse Hanson's jealousy. Beth and Marjorie Graham stayed with Margolis and Bill Robinson at the Guardian Arms apartments. Robinson and Margolis both claimed to have slept in the bed with Marjorie while Beth slept on the sofa. But Antoth later stated that Robinson was dating Marjorie, and Margolis was dating Beth. Much of Margolis's Navy history is found on the Black Dahlia in Hollywood.com website. Their sources are not listed, so everything related should be taken with a grain of salt. But if true, this information makes him an interesting suspect. After graduating high school, Margolis planned on going to the University of Chicago to study pre-med. But he joined the Navy instead, serving in the Navy Medical Corps. For the first 2 years of his service, he was placed in Illinois, Washington, and Camp Pendleton in California. A psychiatric evaluation from his time in Illinois stated,
This subject is calm, quiet, and a resentful individual who shows ample evidence of open aggression, has had trouble in adjusting himself to Navy discipline, has become resentful over this. He desired operating room technique which was never granted to him, and this is one of the underlying bases for his resentment and disgust. A tension state has resulted, and at present this man shows a lack of interest, aims, and ability to concentrate. The content of thought shows a beginning hypochondriasis and self-seated resentment.
He was then sent to the Pacific Theater, where he served during the Battle of Okinawa. The psychiatric evaluation stated he was denied training in operating room technique, so he probably served as a Navy corpsman. Corpsmen serve in a similar capacity to Army medics, but receive additional medical training, including some surgery. There were 3 instances of corpsmen performing appendectomies on submarines during World War II. See link below for a history of corpsmen during the war. Corpsmen were issued special bolo-style knives, strong and durable enough for cutting brush, but sharp enough to perform amputations. A quote below from the Hyperwar website, see link below, details the experience of Navy corpsmen during the Battle of Okinawa.
The Okinawa operation proved the need for a large pool of trained hospital corps personnel replacements. The 1st Marine Division had 478 casualties among hospital corps personnel during the campaign in southern Okinawa. Of these, 49 were killed in action, 226 wounded in action, 17 injured, and 186 were sick. Dispatches for urgently needed replacements of medical personnel resulted in some replacements being obtained, of whom only a few had been in combat and had any idea of the duties expected of them. It was the consensus of the medical staff that the best solution was to order a minimum of 100 extra hospital corpsmen to each Marine Division at least 2 months prior to an operation. These men could then be trained under experienced personnel. After training with line regiments, the corpsmen could be transferred to the medical battalion where they would be immediately available as replacements.
There, he worked in hellish conditions at airfield medical stations that came under almost constant bombing and strafing runs for 29 days straight. He was then sent to a hospital where he treated at least 1,500 patients with little rest and sleep. He spent 2 weeks at the front lines, working out of ad hoc aid stations set up in a cave, where he treated the wounded from 2 companies that suffered heavy casualties. After heavy rains caused a cave-in, he was buried in mud up to his neck, and forced to dig his way out. After the war, Margolis was a pre-med student at the University of Southern California. He married Edith Bernstein on November 26, 1946, moved back to Chicago, and apparently gave up his medical aspirations by getting a job working for an auto supply company. So, make of that what you will. If true, it is an interesting account of the only verified boyfriend of Beth Short to have had any medical training. 12. Glenn Wolfe. Glenn Wolfe owned the Chancellor Apartments where Beth stayed in apartment 501 with several other girls. In Lieutenant Jemison's memo to the District Attorney's investigation, page 6. He said Wolfe is known as a sexual maniac by other women. And Toth did not speak highly of him, stating he was a
sexual pervert, maniac, everything. I hate him. He even threatened to kill me once.
13. Michael Anthony Otero. Otero was seen with Beth prior to her departure from Los Angeles to San Diego. And Toth described him as a teacher. May have been friends with Maurice Clement. He had a previous meeting with Toth and Beth at the Biltmore before she left for San Diego. 14. George Bacos. Head usher at NBC Studios who claimed he saw Beth frequently at Brittingham's restaurant, where Salvador Torres Vara was said to work as a dishwasher. This is possibly how Vara's name was added to the list, especially if it was true that he had surgical training in Mexico. Head usher at CBS Studios, John Egger, said this about Bacos.
I don't like him very well. He is very conceited. I just don't care for him myself. Never very close to him, just speaking acquaintance.
Bacos had taken Beth out when his date Lynn Martin was not available, but claimed to have not liked her, saying this.
I used to see her with a lot of people. As a matter of fact, for my part, I tried to avoid her as much as possible. I was new in radio and made contacts, and she dressed kinda cheaply, too obvious and everything. It was best for me especially. Where you would see her most was around CBS. I couldn't afford to be seen with the wrong kind of people. I didn't want to kiss her because of all that goop she used on her face. I'm used to nice cultured girls.
That said, Bacos claimed to have taken Beth out 12 times, I suppose when the 15-year-old Lynn Martin was unavailable. Bacos went on to become a screenwriter who wrote episodes of Kojak and a novel titled Warriors Down. 15. Francis Campbell. Another worker at the Crown Grill. 16. Queer woman surgeon. The queer woman surgeon theory comes from speculation at the time that Beth was killed by a jealous lesbian. And that Beth was a lesbian, but that is another Dahlia myth. This theory was influenced by amateur and quasi-professional profiles, such as Ben Heck's profile where he made statements like,
in nearly all torture cases and mutilation after death, homosexuality is the basic motive. It was a crime done by a lesbian, and not intended as a crime. The killing itself may well have been part of the didos to which the Black Dahlia had submitted herself. She, too, was an odd one, given to humoring the fancies of women as well as men. She is a woman of 40. She is 5 feet 7 inches tall. She is 115 pounds. She is thin, almost gaunt. She has a rudimentary bosom. Her face is long and narrow. She has a receding chin. Her teeth are slightly oversized. She has brown and very wavy hair. Her fingers are long. And she has large eyes, unusually large and arresting eyes.
For more profiles see Black Dahlia Episode 9, Killer Profiles. 17. Dr. Paul de Gaston. De Gaston operated as an abortionist possibly under the alias of C.J. Morris. He was tried for murder and did time. His name was listed in Beth's address book. 18. Dr. A. E. Bricks. His business card was found among Beth's possessions. He claimed she once inquired at his office for the cost treatment for what she said was female trouble, but she did not return. 19. Dr. M. M. Schwartz. And 20. Dr. Arthur McGinnis fought. Because these two practiced out of the same office, I have placed them together. Dr. Schwartz, a dentist, shared a suite at 215 of the Cherokee Building on Hollywood Boulevard with Dr. Arthur M. Fott, a physician. One day after Dr. Fott had left the office for the day, Schwartz and his nurse Miss Barbara Martin claimed a woman came in that they described as the Lady in Red. This Lady in Red was looking for Dr. Fott, who had previously treated her for an inflamed gland that he had lanced. She told Dr. Schwartz that she thought her problem was due to being allergic to latex condoms, saying,
"Every time I play around and have a rubber used on me, I get into this trouble. Gee, I'm tired, I'm whacked out. I didn't get in until about 4 or 5 o'clock this morning. I was practically in San Diego. You're a pretty good-looking doctor. Why don't you examine me?"
Schwartz then said of the incident.
She proceeded to grab my hand, she lifted her dress, and I pulled my hand away and stepped away from her.
The woman left after Fott's nurse Zickler entered the examination room. The next day, Schwartz told Fott about the incident. Fott recalled the woman as being a streetwalker pickup type. Police later questioned Schwartz and nurse Zickler, and both identified the woman as Beth, although their identifications were not very impressive. Schwartz said it
resembles her very, very closely. I'm inclined to think that was her.
And he said Zickler appeared to be positive that it was Beth. I would not call resembles her and appeared to be the most positive of identifications. They also referred to her as the Lady in Red, because Fott and Zickler claimed she usually wore red and even wore a red carnation in her hair. The mannerisms of this woman do not seem to describe Beth Short. The description of her being a streetwalker type, and the sexual passes at Dr. Schwartz are way out of character. That said, it is believed that Beth may have had a problem with her Bartholin glands, and according to the Black Dahlia in Hollywood.com website, Mark Hansen said he drove her to Schwartz's office. If Fott treated women for this condition on a routine basis, it is possible that Schwartz, who this woman was not a patient of, could have mistook her for Beth. Fott also had a brother named Claude who worked for him as a bookkeeper. This may cause some confusion to investigators because the suspect C. Welsh, brother of murder victim Layla Adele Welsh, was reported to have been in California at the time of Beth's murder. Although his name was George, he was sometimes listed as Claude. Lieutenant Jemison questioned Schwartz, who related a similar testimony in Donald Wolfe's The Black Dahlia Files on pages 258 and 259, although this testimony seems to be minus the weird sexualization of the previous quotes. By this time, Dr. Fott had died in 1949.
What type of a doctor was Dr. Fott?
Dr. Fott was a medical doctor, AMD, physician and surgeon.
Well, in the fall of 1946 were you located in a suite with Dr. Fott?
Yes, sir.
Sometime in the fall of 1946 did Beth Short come into your office?
It was approximately 14 days before Christmas. There was a young lady, stepped in the suite of offices looking for Dr. Fott, who later appeared to be the same one that we have seen in pictures, Beth Short.
Did you discuss her identity with Dr. Fott along about that time, just after the murder?
He called me in and asked me if I recognized the picture, and I said I didn't. He said, "Haven't you seen her up here?" And I said, "My God, that face does look familiar."
Well, go ahead and tell about your conversation and experience with Beth Short.
She walked in the office, asking for Dr. Fott. I told her the doctor left his office and he wouldn't be back until 9 o'clock the following morning. I questioned her as to what her trouble was. She seemed to be rather reluctant to talk. This was in the reception room, there were other patients waiting. We stepped into Dr. Fott's office, and she pulled an address book out, and she wanted to call somebody. She did call somebody from that office. It was a type of conversation you couldn't tell who she was talking to or what it was all about, but it was on the shady side. I do recall that.
Do you know whether she called a man or a woman?
It appeared to be a man the way she talked.
What did she say? Anything about that call?
I have big ears, inasmuch as it was a peculiar setup. I tried to determine what type of a conversation it was, but, you couldn't tell being at one end of it.
You have now seen a photograph of Beth Short. Would you say that was the girl that was in there that afternoon?
I would say it resembles her very, very closely.
And you're quite positive that you never saw her after that?
I'm positive. Incidentally, I asked Dr. Fott the following day whether or not the patient had returned to see him, and he said no.
So make of this what you will and come to your own conclusions. 21. Dr. Patrick S. O'Reilly. Previously mentioned in the Mark Hansen episode. O'Reilly is probably one of the best of the little-known suspects in my opinion. He was a friend of Mark Hansen who attended sex parties in Malibu with him. He savagely beat his secretary in a sexual frenzy. And he cut off his right pectoral muscle in a similar fashion to Beth's right breast. 22. Mark Hansen. Previously mentioned in his own episode. That covers many of the lesser-known suspects, although some seem to be more like witnesses than suspects. Next week we will look at the last of the better-known suspects, Walter Bailey, and include his partner, Alexandra Von Partica, who I think is a viable suspect either as an accomplice or on her own.